Okay. Let's start before. So where we're going is we're now going to look at the do the revision bit. Whoops, if we get it there. There we go. So it'll be the revision bit, which is I'll show you the questions in a minute. But before we do that, I had an email question this morning, actually, as I was getting up, and I thought, well, it might be a good point to start here. So the question was, tell me what's going to be on the exam paper. No, it wasn't exactly that, but it nearly was. It was, what sort of things should I revise? So interpret what's on the exam paper. First thing to say is I've written so many exam papers over the years that I have a very convenient function that operates in my head, that I write the exam paper, hand it over to the office, and I have immediately forgotten exactly what's on this year's paper. It just becomes a splurge across the years. But there's a few things that one can say about the sorts of things that you can assume when you're thinking about what sort of questions will, what should I revise? The standard answer is always everything. We could examine you on absolutely anything on the syllabus. That's the standard answer. It's a bit of a cop-out, really, and it doesn't work too well if we accidentally end up asking something that looks at least like it's not something we've covered. We wouldn't ask you something that's completely random, but bear in mind that the way the questions are structured, the last part of each question is designed to make you think. So it might actually look like it's not something we've covered on the course. What it would be is something that we think is reasonable to synthesise, really is the term, to work out what the answer must be from what we have taught you on the course. That's the sort of point of a last part question in an exam, to see how well you can take what you've been taught and then apply it to something different. There are some other things. So obviously, I think Gary will always say, go through the past papers. They're not. I don't know that they're all available on the Comp 2203 site, unfortunately, but enough of them are, so it's worthwhile going through those. And that will give you a good flavour. Also, if you go through the past papers, you'll see that there's a theme. So what we do, there'll be 3 questions we mentioned last time. You answer any 2. Each question will be basically themed. We might pull a couple of themes together, like very often we might put PHP and MySQL together into one question, for example. You will find that there are recurrent themes. I wouldn't guarantee that anyone, well, there's probably 4 or 5 themes, so you're clearly not going to get all of those every single year if there's only 3 questions. But you might expect that. Let's think for a moment about the module. What we aim to do here is to equip you with industry standard tools. So you might expect the exam to cover somewhere along the line something to do with Git, with GitHub, or Git version control generally, and things like frameworks like Bootstrap. You might expect that sort of thing to come up in the exam. Might not come up every year, but one or the other, or a bit of both, are good bets for the exam. So make sure you're clear on those. Obviously, where we do PHP and MySQL, you might expect something to come up on those somewhere. So I think in one of the questions last time before Christmas, we had a little sort of exercise in how things evaluate in a PHP if statement, for example. It was something like that, question 2, if I remember rightly. So those sorts of questions might come up. Anything else that... So you'll see. So also in the questions we're going through, the 2 before Christmas and these 3 that we'll look at today, they're sort of a steer also in terms of the sort of things that we might ask. Although I mentioned before Christmas that the questions that we got on this revision session are the ones that didn't get into the exam paper for various reasons. But nevertheless, it gives you a steer. So I don't know if you can think of anything else that would be useful as a steer. I think that's probably enough without sort of saying, yes, I just remembered that. Question 2 says, which I'm not going to do.
I think it's Yes. If one is prudent, then one can anticipate what might be on the paper.
So you might be alluding to the fact that they're hatters. I think that better be wiped off the audio before it goes on. A good cough. Okay, let's look at the questions. So this is the bit you really want, I guess. So let's go straight into question 3. I think that is, let me just check, I think that's the whole question. So why don't we spend possibly 8 to 10 minutes working through this question, and then we'll come together again and we'll work through what we think the answers are to those questions. Okay, so if you've got pencil and paper or whatever, it's a pencil and paper time now. Or if you've got, if you're going to work on the screen, time to start typing. So we'll give you notionally till about 20 to 10, but we'll see how you're getting on. Okay, are you happy to have a look at those 3 answers then? So first question is, define a CSS framework. A nice broad question. What sort of answers have we got for that? Go on, Ben, you're smiling.
It provides the user with a set of classes and IDs that have predefined styling.
I missed the first bit. It provides the
user with a set of classes and IDs that have predefined styling.
So provides a set of classes and IDs, and they define styling. I've put that on a separate line because typically if you're marking an exam question, I'd probably have a mark for, actually you might have a mark for classes and a mark for IDs and a separate mark for the fact that they define styling. That's the sort of thing you're looking for. Anything else? Yes.
A set of tools and templates that help users create typical components.
Okay, so set of tools and templates, I think you said. To help users define
typical web components.
Typical web components, that's right. Okay.
Even though this is in a question that specifically says CSS frameworks, did you mention the fact that they also usually allow or give you JavaScript?
Good point. Yeah. It might be worthwhile saying why they'd include JavaScript, which is
to control components such as carousels.
Yeah. So that's that would be the second part of if that was an answer for 2 marks, then you need JavaScript and why JavaScript.
Yep. Anything else? Can you think of anything we've missed there, Russell?
Maybe we've talked about components. I tend to think of components as things like nav bars and cards, alert bars, stuff like that. So you can also say things like layout. All CSS frameworks provide you with a grid layout system.
Yeah. Yes, good point. So we should really be talking about layout in there, shouldn't we? So let's add that in there.
And one of the other key things is cross-browser compatibility. So you can just work in the context of the framework and not have to worry about compatibility with any particular browser.
if we're going down that route, we want to say include anything about mobile display as well, maybe.
Yep. That's true. Yeah. You get some responsive built in.
One of the problems with a question like this is that we've started with what looks like a 4-mark question, maybe with classes and IDs, styling, tools and templates, typical web components. Yeah, 4 marks, done. We've now sort of expanded it, so we're now nearer to 8 or 10 marks if you look at all the different bits and pieces in there. So there is a problem with the question is in that it's a very broad question and it's not exactly clear exactly how much you would be expected to answer there. I wouldn't normally expect an exam question to be quite as broad and vague as that, partly because the external examiner, especially turn the sound off, especially the current one, is very keen on making sure that the questions are very clear and very precise. So it would be much more likely to say something like, give 4 attributes that define a CSS framework, or 8, so you know whether you're looking for 4 things or 8 things or 6 things. The marks are another guide. Bear in mind that with 50 marks per question, it's more likely to be 2 marks for a thing. So if it's 8 marks, it's more likely to be 4 things than 8 things. If it's 16 marks, more likely to be 8 things than 16. But it is a guide. Yeah, that'd probably do for that one, wouldn't it? Okay, so you've got an idea there anyway of what sort of thing there. Oh, what have I just done? Hit the litter bin. Let's move that over. There. Okay, so what about part B? I'm going to ask first of all, it's always worthwhile asking yourself, why has that question been asked, or why has it been asked in that way? Can you think what sort of thing is the questioner looking for when he asks that question? I say he because we're all he's on the team at the moment. Any ideas what are the sorts of things that one might be probing for? Okay, let's get into your answer then. So, what are the problems that might arise? Do you think?
A lack of customizability.
Thank you. Lack of customizability. So, just explain a little bit. Let me write that down first. Customizability. I have no idea how you spell that. That'll do me. So explain what you mean by that, Ben.
So specifically, colours are very difficult to get right with the framework. You've got to overwrite it with your own CSS.
Okay, yeah, so you'd have to override colours to get that going, yeah. Anything else? Let me jump to some here, yeah.
The code might not be maintained by third-party anymore. So
Right, okay. Yes.
Now we're
Yeah. So there could be a lack of ongoing support. I read an interesting article yesterday, I think, about the fact that Canonical in the Linux community, who produce Ubuntu, had a problem with their latest issue of Ubuntu, so they've ditched their what they call it, Unity desktop, and they've gone to GNOME. That was all geek stuff, sorry about that. But the point about it is that even Canonical, who in the Linux world are probably the biggest name, have stopped supporting their specific desktop that they produce for Linux. And that could have massive implications for the Linux world generally, but also for the wider world. So it doesn't matter how big the group are, you can't guarantee ongoing support. Sorry, any other things there?
A similar point to the ongoing support is that obviously you might link to the online Bootstrap, for example, and if the site goes down, then your site no longer works, and if you download it locally and use it that way, then yours will obviously be updated quite quickly.
That sounds like a lose-lose situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that is an interesting issue actually, because obviously one wants to use a content delivery network, a CDN, because it means that you'll keep up to date, and every time it's updated, hopefully you'll get the updates straight through. But the downside of that, as you say, is if the remote site goes down, nothing works. Whereas at least if you've downloaded it locally, which you can do with Bootstrap, then so long as your site's live, which if it isn't, well, you haven't got a website anyway, then your Bootstrap is there as well. There is another area that links with this sort of thinking about relying on third-party delivery. Yeah.
Is it licensing issues?
Oh, licensing, that's an interesting thought. What's your thinking about licensing then?
If you're using a framework for a commercial website, you need to know exactly what you can use this framework for if you're going to be selling your own product.
Okay, good point. So if you're using a third-party provision, then, as you say, you need to be aware of the licensing, because it might be free if you're delivering for this purpose, but if you're delivering for that purpose, you might have to start paying, and you don't want to find letters from the solicitors suddenly arising. I mentioned one other thing that was very much in my mind, which is the issue of security. It's probably not a big deal with CSS, though it could be with the JavaScript. But the question says building a website with third-party code or components, and with something like what's the thing that everyone builds websites with?
WordPress?
WordPress, thank you. Yeah, the thing with WordPress is you've got all the plugins, and you hope that WordPress have done their homework, and that it would be that their stuff would be basically secure. But since you probably need to rely on the plugins as well, and the plugins are provided by third-party folk from the third party, and there are some well-known examples of places where folk have installed a plugin. It's been not exactly sanctioned by WordPress, but it's on the WordPress site, and it proves to be a huge security hole. So the moment you're relying on a third party to provide you with code and components, you are handing over control to them in terms of security. And if there's a bug in their stuff, and even the best folk get bugs that they don't realise are there till much later, then you're exposed.
Even dormant third-party components that you're not using. Say you've installed a WordPress theme with a security hole in it. You're not using that theme actively at the moment. That can still be exploited because the theme's PHP files are still accessible over the web. So, yeah, same with plugins, which is why it's a good idea to keep theme and plugin use to a minimum.
I'm sure I've mentioned this in passing before, but I think you know that I run a Raspberry Pi actually as a web server at home just because I can, but it's huge fun to watch the logs, because virtually throughout the day and night, 24/7, I will find people coming onto my Raspberry. Why my Raspberry Pi? It's sat in my home. It's an amateur job. It's not anything big or professional, although it has got a number of websites on it. And they are sniffing around, and I can guarantee in any 24-hour period there will be continual probes for specific WordPress files, which are obviously ones that have known security problems. I don't run WordPress, partly for that reason, but you can see them looking for these broken files on my web server and doing it day in, day out. So, yeah. Perhaps we should move on to 3, and I think what I'm going to do is use a third blackboard here. So,
just on 2.
yes.
I mean, speaking very broadly with problems that might arise with third-party components and things like that, particularly with a framework, seeing as we're in the CSS framework's part of the exam. So yes, the CSS framework takes a lot of the work off your shoulders in terms of writing boilerplate CSS, the same stuff you'd have to write for any project, and it means that you'll get broad browser compatibility without much effort. But then if a new browser comes out, or there's something happens which means that your framework is no longer compatible with all the browsers, you might then have to go through an extensive overhaul of your code to bring it in line with a new version of the CSS framework. So, for instance, Bootstrap saves me loads and loads of time, but occasionally I have to upgrade a site from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 4, and that's a big job because you have to change a load of CSS, test everything. So yes, they save you time. Advantages, they save you loads of time, they give you browser compatibility and stuff like that. Disadvantage, you still have to do a big block of work every now and then. That's just the nature of the web. So, okay, C.
Answers for C. Describe a web development project where a bespoke solution might be more appropriate than a framework-based solution. What specific aspects of the specification might make this approach suitable? Again, it might be worthwhile just thinking for a minute, what sort of issue do you think that the person writing the question has got in mind that they want you to think through? It is one of those. It is definitely a Part C sort of question or a Part D sort of question, in that we won't have given you a specific answer to something like that anywhere in the lecture series. What we're doing is aiming to say, okay, from what we've taught to you, what do you think are the issues here that we're looking for and that might need working through? You got a thought there, Samir?
This is security reasons.
For security reasons, okay. Let's pop that down. Put it there. So security.
That have popped into my head, actually.
Right. Okay. So explain a little bit more about why security might make you want to go for a bespoke solution rather than a framework-based solution.
Like I said earlier, like if they use frameworks such as WordPress where they have like different files, then it might be easier for like other like hackers to gain their website in.
Okay.
Folks like the MOD and the NHS are very twitchy about using third-party libraries.
It just made me smile to myself a moment there, because I was actually quite surprised that was the answer you came up with, and yet I was just thinking, yeah, but hold on, I've just said that. The reason I don't run WordPress is because people probe my Raspberry Pi to see what broken WordPress files they can find. Okay, so that is a good answer. Any other thoughts about that? Actually, yes.
High throughput websites where you want as little code as possible.
Sorry, say again?
High throughput, like lots of customers using the website at once. So you want maximum efficiency.
Okay. So high throughput, if I heard that right. That's a very good answer, actually. It's an answer I hadn't particularly... Neither of those were the answers I had in mind when I wrote the question. Okay, so because you want high throughput, it needs to be efficient, and the one thing that you can be sure about with a generic framework solution is it might be optimized, but it won't be efficient for a specific scenario. It'll be efficient for a broad range of scenarios, but not for a specific scenario. So if you need high throughput, maybe you need to have a bespoke solution. Good answer. Okay. Any other answers? I'm still going because there was one particular one that I had in my mind when I wrote the question. Okay, I'll tell you what it was. It was the thought that Russell was saying that, like with Bootstrap or any other CSS solution, it's going to be grid-based. There may be solutions, may be specifications where a grid-based solution is not the most appropriate solution. It's the sort of thing where I have in mind sort of like a graphic design company or something that wants a high degree of control over exactly how things lay out, and a grid solution may make life difficult, shall we say. So I had that sort of idea in mind.
Yeah, I had a Bootstrap project, I think it was Bootstrap 1 or 2 years ago, and I worked with a graphic designer, and he would draw up the designs and I would implement them, and he was always very happy because I'd implement them to the pixel of what he designed in Bootstrap. And what I ended up with was Bootstrap plus I think about 3,800 lines of CSS customizing it to achieve that. And that makes you think, wow, is it really worth using Bootstrap? So yeah, there you go, case in point.
Yeah.
The other one I've thought of, it sort of goes with the high throughput, is if you're writing an API, which I would define as a web development project, it doesn't actually have any graphical interface, it doesn't have any HTML, it's just JSON, then you wouldn't need a CSS framework at all. And there are lots and lots of projects out there that are just APIs, like the OMDB API that you used in the coursework. Yes, it has a website on the front, but it's just the reference site. It's quite separate from the actual API that does the work.
Okay. The crucial thing really is, as I mentioned before, that's really, particularly that C, is a typical Part C sort of question. And I wouldn't, in that sort of scenario, I wouldn't expect anyone to get all 4 of those. We've got those collaboratively. No one of us individually would have put all 4 of those together, I suspect. So typically on a question like that, you might sort of say, well, there's a range of possible answers. We're looking for, in that case, you might look for 2 or you might look for 3, and you'd give marks. So if you gave 4, you'd get max marks plus. Well, no, you wouldn't. You can only get max marks, but you get max marks for only giving whichever one decided 2 or 3 of those, and that is a typical way one would work on that sort of a question.
Yeah,
so you don't have to have every answer. Sorry.
Yeah, but they do have to be well argued and justified.
Absolutely.
That's where you get 1 or 2 marks for writing the name, the thing that you're suggesting, and then the bulk of the marks, the other 6. For actually saying why.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Time is pressing on. I think we
Next
probably
page.
should go to the next slide. Yeah. So again, maybe I can. I'm going to photograph this in a moment, so I'll get that out of the way in a minute. For anyone who's not here, and because the live stream hasn't worked. But if we have, say, another 8 minutes or so till about 10:15, see how you get on. With question 4. Right, looking at that, my immediate thought is actually I've probably got the parts of the question the wrong way round. I think it would probably make more sense to do B first, describe the sequence of actions that occur when requesting a web page in a browser. So would someone like to start us off with B, telling us what the sequence of actions are that occur when requesting a web page in a browser? First thing?
HTTPS request is created and sent to the web server.
Okay, so we'll start with a click and we'll create HTTPS request to remote, I think one might say URI for that, I'm not sure. Obviously the remote location anyway. And then?
Once the web server receives the request, it will find the file and pack it up and forward it.
Result I'll put there. Okay.
The browser would then receive it, but when it goes to display it, if it finds any additional files that are needed in the header, such as CSS or JavaScript, it will then send a request for them.
Whoops. Put additionally required resources, maybe. They probably are files, but yeah. Yep.
Once it's received everything, it displays it.
So it's a repeat run-through server. And then renders, browser renders. Okay, sounds good to me. So basically, that is something that I think we've been much more clear on this year than in previous years. So the answer I would have expected in previous years would have been, you click on the thing, makes a request to the server sends the file back, you render it, job done. What you're much more aware of this year is the fact, no, there's much more to it than that. You'll have watched what happens when you click the network tab in the Google Tools, developer tools, and you'll have seen the request go through, back comes the initial request. Now you know you need a CSS, so you send off for that, and maybe in parallel with that some requests for graphics and stuff. Eventually it all comes back in. When there's enough in there, it can start to render the page, and then maybe have placeholders so that the remaining graphics and stuff fit in place. And because of that, you are particularly aware as a group that things. Let's stop there, because otherwise we get into part A. So let's go straight into. Anything we've missed in there?
PHP.
Yeah. So in this bit, we might want to add something. We might want to expand that about services the request. That might mean PHP, might mean MySQL, Access. There may be other things going on there. So again, yes. I sort of hoped you were sort of thinking that as well. I liked the terms that the web server services the request rather than provides the required resource, because that's exactly right. Shall we go back to A then? Let's have a little look at A. And I'm going to put it, maybe I'll shut that right to the top. I won't go any higher. Bother. Okay. Okay, so let's have a little look at what factors therefore affect the download speed of the page. Far away. You should be able to list a few things now, hopefully. Amy, you're avoiding my gaze. We haven't heard from you.
Like if you have advertisements on the side.
Oh, okay, right. Why? Then I think that's a good answer. Why are adverts a problem?
It's like more third-party software, and they're obviously loading stuff from their side and use some JavaScript and stuff. So it's just like obviously loading more things on the page that you don't necessarily need.
So more processing, more remote accesses. Sorry, my handwriting is appalling. I hope you can make sense of that. So more processing, more remote accesses. In fact, we're probably well aware of the interminable time it takes when I'm trying to do my online crossword, and it freezes while it gets this advert and that advert and that advert, and this video runs and nothing else happens till it's all done. Okay, that's one. What else? Even if we're advert free, there are issues that affect the download speed. Don't be shy. Go on then. You look like you've got one ready to go, Ben.
The connection speed to the server.
Okay, connection speed to the server. Oh, rubbish, I'm not very good at doing this, am I? Connection speed.
I presume you're talking bandwidth there.
Yeah.
What are the factors of the connection that would affect it? Latency.
Yeah, go on.
The load that the server is currently under.
Sorry, the load.
The load that the server is currently under.
Okay, so in other words, how much the server is loaded? Yeah, okay. So if the server is having loads of accesses, it's going to slow everything down, in other words. Okay, good answer. Anything else? Go on.
Whether that file is in the server's cache.
Okay, yeah, caching is another big issue. Good. I actually had in mind some simple stuff when I wrote the question, which was things like size of graphics. Real sort of basic size of graphic files. Basic stuff that one can easily forget about. But if you have some huge graphics that you're downloading onto your home page, that's going to slow it down compared with if you think about putting thumbnails on. That's less of a problem now, perhaps with things like 4G over mobile and so on. But it's still an issue, and particularly an issue because, I should say graphic or video files, because another thing that tends to slow things down over a poor connection is if you've got homepage, massive banner, huge video coming down, it just clogs it up like crazy. Another practicality of, let me just sign in again. Okay, another practicality for download speed. I noticed, for example, on some of your coursework submissions that some of you were aware of it being an issue of where you put the JavaScript. Google Developer talks about it being above or below the fold. In other words, it is convenient to make sure you've got the core page downloading so that the browser knows where everything is going to go, and then worry about any any JavaScript stuff that might slow it down a bit. That can come in due course. So you might get the page down statically first, then the JavaScript sort of comes into action and activates it. Okay, so one or two comments about that as a question and as answers. You need to be quite careful here. It's particularly problematic because I tend to ask the questions, and because I have spent many years teaching the networking module, not just the not just the application scripting module. And you need to be careful about thinking which module you're in, because you could, with a question like that, you could get into a whole load of questions that would be very appropriate for the networking module. And things like the server loading, the caching and so on, they are good answers on this module, but they also very, very close to the bit where you're stepping over into the networking module. There's some lovely stuff in Tannenbaum on his networking book about how you can have a link, he thinks in terms of going across America, like a 3,000 mile long, or even a 1,000 mile long would do, cable, and you up the bandwidth and it doesn't improve the speed at all, and he works through why that happens on a very long line. But that's more the networking module. We're more worried about the our being the application scripting module, so you've got to put that together. Again, in terms of marking, so long as you've got a focus on things that will affect particularly the design and layout of the web page and making sensible decisions as a web developer, if you tend to stray over a little bit into the networking side, it probably won't be a problem. You're not going to lose marks, that's for sure. The part C probably takes us into the issues, it takes us on to the third step. So how would you diagnose the cause of a slowly downloading web page? List the tools and techniques that you would use. That bit is easy. That actually isn't a part C question when it says list the tools and techniques. What tools and techniques would you use?
Development mode and network tab.
Sorry, say again?
The network tab and development.
Yeah. So developer tools. Networking tab. That's a good answer for. Must be for at least 2 points on that one. 2 marks. Yeah. Anything else?
The technique for answering this question is to go through the factors that affect the download speed, which we've already got, and then just say, okay, how do I inspect each one? So, how do you work out if it's ads that's doing it? You look at the developer tools networking tab. How would you diagnose it if it's the connection speed? If you suspect a connection speed. Question.
Yes. It's a problem I had to work out yesterday when I was trying to work out how to improve the quality of the YouTube stream.
Ping the server.
Sorry?
Ping the server.
Oh, that's a good answer actually. Yeah, okay.
So that would give you an idea of the latency.
I actually used one of those websites about, can't remember which one it is, but one that will measure both the upload and download speeds, and that was a very revealing response actually. So being on something like 50 megabit Virgin fibre at home, I had for download was something like, I think it was something like 8 or 9 megabits out of a supposed 50 megabits. For upload, it wasn't even a megabit. No wonder I had a problem streaming. It was awful. But that I got through going through...
Speedtest.net.
Sorry?
Speedtest.net.
Yeah, that's something like that. So it'll give you an idea of what sort of things are going on there. Any other tools and techniques that we've got? Yes?
Would you say file compression? I mean the media compression, like pictures and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so we'd have a look at the size of our images maybe then. Yeah.
Okay, so that was looking at
Yeah.
size.
The
Okay.
sizes of the files that it uses and thinking about compressing them.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Oh, actually, I think under techniques, I would include check Google Developer. In the sense that Google Developer do both things actually. They will check your site out for you and they will offer all sorts of hints and advice, and it's very good hints and advice. So I would always check Google Developer from that point of view.
Try a different browser or computer.
That's a very good point, actually. That's a good point. Right. I think that's probably. I mean, that's a fairly full answer that we got all together there. Yes, go on.
Check the number of CDNs that you're loading from.
Yep. So check the CDN, I think you said.
Yep.
Yes, that's always is always a problem if you're using a remote site like that. You are dependent on the network access speed to that site, so that's another advantage. Going back to the previous part or previous question, was it of an advantage of having Bootstrap locally rather than via a CDN? The advantage of that would be that hopefully. Well, not necessarily actually, but it might improve your speed of access. It depends a bit. Okay, I think we've just about time to look at the last question. I don't know if we've got too much time to spend on it. Yes. There we go. I think maybe what we need to do is probably just have a few moments looking at it while I photograph the boards, and then maybe we need to just go straight in and answer it because we've only got 10 minutes in total. Okay, I know that's not really long enough to sort of get particular answers to that, but I think in view of the time we need to just sort of look through that and get some ideas together. So Russell was just saying, oh, this is all coursework really. Yeah, so let's have a look at part A, and as Russell says, obviously this is last few years question, in that it says describe the benefits of using classes with the MySQLi library. We're not using the MySQLi library, we're using VDO, but the question still stands, what are the benefits of using classes? And you can probably roll that straight off now, I guess. What would you say? Go on.
There are some built-in functions that convert SQL results straight to PHP objects. So it's just easy.
Excellent. So can use built-in functions. To convert results to objects. So that's a little bit condensed, but you know what I mean by that. Anything else? How about things like I would add in maybe clarity as just a term. These pins are not so good. So in other words, what do I mean by that? Rather than having sort of some random data that you pull in and you've got various variable names you're pulling into it, if you bring it in using a class, you've got a clear definition of things. You can access the data easily and clearly.
It's almost typed.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly, yeah.
And there are generic benefits of using classes as well, particularly with MySQLi. So, what would you actually build in? What would you build in your classes? What can you have in classes? Two things. Yeah. It's attributes and methods. So the attributes are the results in the database, and the methods are things that you can do with them. So yeah, it lets you tie methods directly in with the data that's in your database. So it's almost like binding useful code with your database rows. And normally you'd have to do that, without classes, you'd be writing that code over and over and over again in your web pages. But with classes, you can write it once in the class, keep it where it belongs, and reuse it wherever you need it.
Any other thoughts? I'm keen to sort of push us quickly through because we haven't got a lot of time left. Happy with that? Okay, let's then move to how a $get variable will be used to retrieve a specific row from a database. Dropped it. That one is probably too straightforward in the sense of that's just a lift straight from the labs, isn't
We've
it?
been doing that since week 4.
Yes. So maybe what I would expect to see from you this year for that, we're going to retrieve a specific row from a database. So that sounds like we're doing a PDO, really, doesn't it?
Yes.
As an example for that. So we want our whatever query, not dollar statement, equals whatever with the query in the thing, and then when we dollar query execute, we put the data in there. So our $get goes in here, not in there, in other words. But I mean that's straight from the coursework.
Yeah. So this is a broad question. Actually, the subject of this question is the get variables. What are they?
Yeah.
Why do we have them? What can you do with them?
Yeah.
So you might expect this to be, I suppose, a 4 marker.
Yeah. Yes. Except it would be 8 on the current 50 marks per question thing.
Oh yes, exactly.
Yes.
So okay, an 8 marker.
Yes. 4 things that we're looking for.
Yes. Describe the get variable to begin with. What is it? How do we use it? And then relate it to MySQL. And how you actually use it for the PDA.
I do know that our current external examiner would get very excited about the fact that we haven't actually said define $get variables or explain how they're used. So unless we'd done that, he would protest that we wouldn't be allowed to give marks for that.
So we had a question B, which was what colour is the sky? We'd have to have a question A, which is what is the sky?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
All makes good sense, maybe. Right. So a MySQL database transaction is failing to display a result in your web page. Describe the process you would use to determine the point of failure. I've got a problem now because what I would do is rather than write it on the board, I would enact it. And I think we might have done this in the lecture, so I might just do that again and just say what I had in mind when I wrote that was the fact that as soon as you have a MySQL transaction going on as part of delivering the results for your web page, you've got a several stage process. and being aware of the fact that a failure can happen at any point in that process helps you to identify what you need to look at. Because it's like a scattergun thing. So you request this from the database, the web page comes back and it renders and it hasn't worked. Where do I start? Well, I start by saying, okay, there's several stages. First of all, I create the request at the web page, as we thought on the other question. That goes to the web server. The web server now says, I need to create the web page that you've requested using the database. So the server now has to make a request to what might be, or at least conceptually is on a different machine. It might not be, but conceptually it's a different thing. It's the database server. So it puts the request together to the database server and passes that over. The database server, the MySQLi server, now needs to process the request, which may work or may not work, and return a result. The web server now needs to take that result, put it together, and send it back to the browser. So it feels, I think it's about 4 or 5 steps, but it feels like half a dozen almost. And there could be a failure at any point. So personally, what I would do if it's failing is I would try and break it into 2. So I know that I've created the request here on my browser and it's failed. Let's just check what happened over here. Forget the web server for a moment. What happened over here on the database server? There's one of 2 possibilities. The expected change to the database has actually happened, or it hasn't. If it's happened, then the problem must be in the return journey. If it hasn't happened, I know the problem has happened on the journey to the server, assuming that I'm making an update to a database. So I've at least split that problem in half. It's called the binary divide approach to problem solving. Then once you know whether it's on the outgoing journey or the return journey, you can now say, whichever of those 2 it is, let's now look at the steps in that bit and divide it down. So it saves you sort of fishing around, oh maybe it's that, or maybe it's that, maybe it's that, maybe, who knows. Let's be methodical about it and split it. So that was the thinking behind that question, but you might have other thoughts about ways in which you would approach that sort of problem. It's really to get, again, it's a Part C question, it's to get you thinking about the level of complexity of that sort of problem in putting up something on a web page and how you're going to fix it. That's a very quick, get to the answer quick bit. Are you, anything you want to ask on that? Anything you're unsure about? Any other questions? It's your last, no, it isn't your last opportunity, but I'm not guaranteeing we can get a prompt reply via email if you've got last minute email requests. If you've got a question, for sure don't email on the day before the on the evening before the exam, because I can't guarantee we'll get an answer back in time. That is something I was going to say about exams. I might put some notes up on the... I might have done it. There are some notes from long ago about preparing for an exam that is worth thinking through. So, typically, don't go into an exam hungry, thirsty or tired. Okay? So staying up till 2 a.m. the night before doing last minute revision is a bad idea. Capital B, capital I. Okay? Do not do it. I have seen someone on my course when I was a student who was taken out of the exam with double vision because he'd done exactly that and he couldn't complete the exam. If you've done your revision properly, then last minute revision is pointless. So what I would aim to do is don't just aim to memorise stuff. That's well, it's not how I work anyway. If you aim to make sure you've understood it, then last minute revision is not important. Make sure you get to bed early the night before, have a good night's sleep, have a good breakfast, whatever. And I think nowadays you're allowed a bottle of water in the exam is probably a good idea.
Go to the pub afterwards, not before.
Absolutely. Anything else about hints for exams?
I think a lot of the questions on our exams are, particularly here in this degree, are based on your ability to infer the answer. So,
Yeah.
as David said, being able to memorise and parrot answers back ain't going to get you very far.
It'll get you through the part A's.
It'll get you through the part 8.
Yes.
So there's a nice, probably 40% for you there.
Yeah, that's the plan.
So, yes, if you want to do better than that, you have to understand the concepts and be able to think through the problems that we pose you in the exam. So no pressure.
Yes, yeah.
But, go with the attitude of, you're going to win this thing and you'll win the thing.
Yeah. The fact that you're here this morning probably is a very good sign that you're in the right place, your head's in the right place, you're doing the right things. So don't panic.
Yeah.
Also, we've never had anyone fail the exam, have we?
I think so, no.
I think you can fail it if you don't turn up.
Or if you forget your name.
Yes. Thank you for coming. Thank you. It's been lovely having you as a group. We've loved working with you this year. All the best for the exam and all the best for the rest of your degree and the rest of your life.